Hi True Avatars, welcome to the 18th episode of your Queer Video Game Podcast. I'm your host, Zoey Wild. I am a transgender woman and my pronouns are she, her. For the first half of this week's episode, it's just me. I'll be talking about what I've been playing, and then I'll cover a bunch of headlines, including a pretty major development with the latest game from Celeste creator, the GLAAD Media Awards has some queer representation, and there's some not so great news for a AAA queer game series that we've discussed on the show before, plus a whole lot more. In the second half, I'm thrilled to be joined by Lloyd, a Twitch streamer and my first ever trans-masculine guest. He's had a very interesting journey, having transitioned gradually with his audience, so please stick around for our conversation. However, first and foremost, I'd like to take a second to thank you. To thank you for being you. If you're listening to this show at any point in time, I want to thank you for being your authentic self, for existing and persevering, and for getting to where you are now. Whether the journey you're on is complete, in progress, or ever evolving, your presence here is so important, not only to me, not only to your queer friends and allies, but to yourself. Every day you spend on this earth is a blessing to everyone else. I know that sounds incredibly cheesy, but you and I both know that some days are easy and some days are hard, and it's incredibly important to take a step back and acknowledge that despite everything, you're still you. That quote from Undertale, which I've paraphrased slightly, rings truer every day. I just feel that this is an important time to remind you, my queer friend, my true avatar, that we have always been here and we will always be here. Keep fighting the good fight, because as long as we are here, they will never win. Anyway, I'm stepping off my podium for now, so let's talk about some video games. So, what I've been playing this week. Usually I have a guest on to talk with me about this, so the section goes a little bit longer than usual, and generally I let my guests kind of talk because, to be honest, I don't get a chance to play a ton of video games. I spend a lot of time on the podcast, I have a job, so I don't have a ton of time to play video games in my free time. That said, I did play a couple games this week. One of them I'm not going to be talking about for a couple more weeks, because I'm going to do a whole episode based around that game and a couple others. However, this week I've been playing more Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, and I'm still whittling away, to be honest. Yeah, it's a kind of a big game. It's not the biggest RPG I've ever played, but it's really adorable. I'm just kind of like taking my time with it. I'm enjoying it. To be honest, I'm kind of a little antsy to get through it because there's a couple other RPGs that are queer themed or queer developed that I really want to get to. But for now, I'm just kind of like enjoying my time. I'm at the section now where you go to this kind of big sky island. I'll try not to spoil too much, but and maybe too, if you're worried about spoilers, maybe skip ahead in the show about maybe 2 or 3 minutes, because I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I have a lot of news to get through. But I'm at this point now where you save this egg that keeps bouncing around and talking, and then at a certain point, like, it follows you around because you've saved it, and then later on in the game, you're like doing this, you're basically battling your way through like this tournament, and this egg follows you into the locker room and eventually hatches into like a baby Yoshi with a mohawk. And the baby Yoshi, I don't know if I didn't look this up, so I'm not sure if the baby Yoshi can just be randomly any color, which would be super cool. But my baby Yoshi is orange, so I named him Mango because I have a leopard gecko named Mango because she is orange. And although she's grown up and she's become quite a bit less orange as an adult, she still has a nice orange little tint to her. So I thought I would kind of honor her in the game by naming the baby Yoshi Mango. And that's literally as far as I've gotten. The last point in the game that I got to was the baby Yoshi hatched. I named him Mango, and I just haven't had a chance to really get back to it yet. There is another game I played a few weeks ago, though, that I'd like to talk about. It's called Start Again, and it's a prologue to In Stars in Time, which Ekami has talked about on the show before. So basically, it's like there's been a lot of video games and movies that have been inspired by the movie Groundhog Day, where you keep reliving the same day or the same section of time over and over again. So like a time loop story. This one is super interesting, though, because RPGs in general are their own time loop, because if you lose in a battle, you just kind of loop back to where you were before, and you try again until you beat the boss, whether that's through grinding or through taking a different strategy, but you keep trying and trying different strategies until you win. So I think making an RPG based around that mechanic, where it kind of like takes that mechanic and has the characters in the game acknowledge that the mechanic is happening in real time, is super clever. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to play In Stars in Time, because again, it's an RPG, it takes a lot of time to play. But when I told Ekami about my interest in playing the game and possibly picking up the limited run games physical, because it looks like a nice special edition too and everything, she said, why don't you go try the prequel first, which is only a few bucks. It's on Steam. You can try it. It's like a demo, but it's also not just a demo for fans to play, but it does act as a prologue to the game. And it also acts as like a test drive for the developers to see if their game worked. I'm blanking on what you call that now, like a prototype, I guess. So anyway, I decided to play it. When I happened to pick it up, it happened to be on sale for maybe $2 or $3 Canadian. It's normally, I want to say $10. So I picked it up, and I did put it off for quite a while. I didn't get a chance to play it until just after my holiday break. And I played it, I sat down there for like, I want to say, it took me a little while. It took me like, I want to say 2 or 3 hours, which maybe is not as long as it should take. But like the game and the mechanic suggests, yeah, you keep trying to beat the final boss over and over again. And so the premise of the game is that, yeah, you're in this world that's ruled, it's black and white, by the way, it's top-down RPG, and you have a party following you around, and you are trying to beat what they call the king. And he's this guy who's taken over the world, and he's frozen almost the entire world's citizens. And you're like the last hope for humanity, basically. So you are trying to, like, you get through the last dungeon. You're playing through the last dungeon of the game, basically. And in this demo, it's a very small dungeon, admittedly. But as you go through the game, they don't really teach you the mechanics. They kind of give you like the basics, like it's rock, paper, scissors, like literally rock, paper, scissors. Like you have rock attacks, you have paper attacks, and you figure out quickly that like the game doesn't like just show you what type, quote unquote, like is this a rock enemy? Is this a paper enemy? But the game kind of hints like, oh, look at the character, the enemy's hands, and you'll see like if they're making like a scissors symbol. So as you're playing through this demo, this prologue, you're figuring out, the best strategies, how to use your attacks, just all the mechanics that this RPG introduces to you. And then eventually, after a few runs, you figure out that you have a good chance at beating the final boss. And then, so you do that, and it just gives you a nice little like microcosmic version of the game, like the full game, basically. Because I assume that there's elements of this that are going to go right back into the final game. So I played that, and I fell in love with it. Like at first I was not sure. I was like, I'm not sure I'm getting the mechanics. Are they too simple? Are they too complicated? But like by the end, you've like fallen in love with the characters, and this is only like a 2 or 3 hour demo, but like I was in love with the characters, I was in love with the mechanics, and I was like, it was at that point too where I was like, I'm gonna go buy the full game, and I gotta start playing it right now. I don't have time for that yet. However, I do really want to play In Stars and Time. So at this point, I am just waiting for like a moment to like sit down with that. There's other RPGs I want to play too. There's this game I found out about called Blue Reflection Second Light, which is a sequel to a JRPG. That's very women focused. It's all women characters, but the way I saw it described on Gaming Magazine's website in their review was that it's basically Sapphic Persona or something to that extent. So that's another big game that I'd like to play. There's also Super Lesbian Animal RPG or Super Animal Lesbian RPG. I can't remember which way that goes, but that's another game that I would really, really like to sink my teeth into. Like, yeah, there's just like a bunch of like queer RPGs that seem really awesome to play. And like RPGs, as I'm going to talk about with Lloyd later, you'll hear, we recorded that segment first. I'm recording the news now. You'll hear that, yeah, RPGs are just kind of a time suck, in a good way, of course, but like, I just don't have time to play that many RPGs. And there's so many other queer games that I want to get to as well, so I can play them and talk about them on the show and hype them up. So yeah, I have to decide after I finish Paper Mario, which admittedly I'm like, I want to say 10 hours into Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door. So I don't really know. I think it's like a 25, 26 hour game, maybe by the time, and the way I play through, I play a bit slowly too. So maybe a 30-hour game. So I've got another 20 hours to get through. So I should probably start powering through that. Maybe I should carve out time every night to actually get through it, because then I can talk about it on the show. But also, yeah, I can get to other things too. So, also, if you have any thoughts too, recommendations, or you're like, oh, hey, Zoey, I heard you're deciding between these 3 RPGs. I've played all 3, and I think this is the one you should start with next. Feel free to drop a comment on any of the socials. Obviously, you can find the show on trueavatarspodcast.com, all one word, at True Avatars on most social media pages. You can search the full podcast name, True Avatars Queer Video Game Podcast, on Facebook. And I have my thoughts about Meta. I have my thoughts about Twitter. But I'm also of the opinion, too, that even though I really, really, really don't want to support fascists, and some of them are actual literally Nazis now, but I also believe that, like, being on that platform, I'm one dissenting voice as a resistance. I don't support these platforms, and obviously by being on them, I kind of do support these platforms. It's a fine line, I admit. Some people might agree, some people might disagree, some people might have their own thoughts. Again, feel free to reach out wherever, and tell me your thoughts. I would love to hear from people listening to the podcast. Every week there's like our average listeners goes up just a little bit. So if you're listening to this podcast, please tell me that you are. Leave a review, leave a comment, reach out via DM. I want to hear from you. Again, even if you don't, I know at the end of the show I always say if you want to, if you know anyone or a good queer story, like reach out. But like I also just want to hear from you. Queer people, I mean that when at the end of the episode, when I say queer people have to stick together. And now more than ever, we really need to form community. So please reach out. I would love to talk with you. I would love to open a dialogue. I would like to hear from people who are listening to the show. And again, maybe there's a game that you know of that you think I know of, and I just don't. It's really hard to just it's not easy to find every queer game because some games are not made by queer people, but they're queer themed. Some games just have like pronoun options. There's also a lot of porn out there, as I've talked about before. So it's really hard to just like figure out like what's a good queer game that's worth playing. And there's so many of them out there too. Like even what I think some of the games that are not necessarily as good as other games or not as polished or not as big or as well known, like it's still worth talking about and worth platforming or highlighting on this platform. So please, anyway, I've rambled enough now. I have no one to unfilter me today. Normally I kind of just like ask a question, I sit back, or I prompt my guests. Anyway, that's what I've been playing. I've been playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, and I've been playing Start Again, which is a prologue to In Stars and Time. So far, based on what I've played of Paper Mario, I highly recommend. And actually, there's some news about that game too. And I would also recommend, obviously, Start Again, the prologue, especially if you're not sure you're going to enjoy In Stars and Time. So yeah, go check those out. And let's get into the news. So there's a lot of queer news this week. Some of it's not so good. I'm going to apologize for this first story. It's going to be very disappointing to some people, especially trans women everywhere who are fans of Celeste. But the next game from Extremely OK Games, which is the team that made Celeste, it's headed up by Maddie Thorson, who is herself a trans woman. But their next game, Earthblade, has been canceled. So we did talk about this game in episode 14 last year, where we were highlighting all the games potentially coming out this year or just coming out in the future. So we did talk about Earthblade, and it has been canceled. So Maddie Thorson, again, the uber famous trans woman who made Celeste, had this to say, and I quote, "Hey everyone, I've got some sad news to ring in 2025. Late last month, Noelle and I made the difficult decision to cancel Earthblade. Yes, we are opening the year with a huge, heartbreaking, and yet relieving failure. I want to outline in this post what led to this decision and what it means for the future of XOK. That's how she abbreviates Extremely OK Games. It's EXOK. Earlier this year, a fracture began forming in the team. Specifically, this was between us, Noelle and I, and Pedro, a founding member of XOK, longtime friend and collaborator, and art director of Earthblade, and pixel/UI artist on Celeste and Towerfall. The conflict centered around a disagreement about the IP rights of Celeste, which we won't be detailing publicly. This was obviously a very difficult and heartbreaking process. We eventually reached a resolution, but both parties also agreed in the end that we should go our separate ways. Celeste's success applied pressure on us to deliver something bigger and better with Earthblade, and that pressure is a large part of why working on it has become so exhausting. Pedro isn't to blame for this. In fact, the split with him has given us clarity to see that we have lost our way and the opportunity to admit defeat. I feel many ways about it, but one big feeling is undoubtedly relief." End quote. Okay, so obviously, it goes without saying, this is disappointing news for Extremely OK Games and fans of Celeste. But the quote about pressure to deliver a game that outdoes Celeste is quite striking to me. And we talked about this on the show before, but in this day and age, most video games are expected to be a massive improvement on their predecessors, not just AAA and lower budget corporate-backed games, but indie games as well. So some examples I have aren't necessarily queer games, but the first one that comes to mind is Sports Story, which came out 2022, I think just before the holidays, in December, which was the long-awaited follow-up to Golf Story. So Golf Story, for anyone who doesn't know, was a smash hit. It was an RPG about playing golf, mostly inspired by the game, I think the Game Boy Advance Mario Golf game. But anyway, the devs of Golf Story, I can only imagine, it was such a success that the devs on that game felt they had to outdo that game making Sports Story. And supposedly, if an in-game reference is to be believed, the pressure led to the game to continue to bloat with expansion and ideas. And at a certain point, the game had to be delivered without really being finished, because people are waiting for it and money keeps getting spent. Hollow Knight Silksong is another game that has a really small indie team. Last I checked, it's 3 people making the game, which is like very small. Anyway. So there's a ton of pressure online from fans waiting for that game. So I can only imagine how that small team feels knowing that people's expectations are as out of control as they are for a massively budgeted game like GTA 6. Seriously, I see as much memeing and as much expectations and comments related to Silksong as I do for GTA 6. And like the budget and the scale of those two games is so different. Like, yeah, it's one thing to be like on a team of thousands developing GTA 6 and feeling some pressure, but like there's people above you that can like take some of that load off, and like the pressure's on like the higher ups at those studios, the pressure's on 2K, Rockstar, for example. But like you're a team of 3 people. That must feel, I can't even imagine. I honestly can't even imagine how that feels, the expectations from fans to deliver a game that not only lives up to its predecessor, but outdoes it. And Concerned Ape as well, the dev behind Stardew Valley, who's one person, he's making Haunted Chocolatier, the follow-up to Stardew Valley. So again, I'm not sure, I don't see as much Haunted Chocolatier speculation, excitement necessarily. It's definitely out there. There's no disappointment about this game being made, but I definitely feel like Stardew Valley is still kind of being supported, so maybe that's taking some of that pressure off. But at the same time, Concerned Ape is probably feeling some pressure to make sure Haunted Chocolatier not only lives up to Stardew Valley, but outdoes it. And even on this podcast, we've talked about, and we're going to talk about later too, the pronoun options alone in Haunted Chocolatier, that there's expectations from a lot of queer fans. So it's just good to remember the human in all of this, remembering that, like, yes, there was obviously pressure on the Celeste team to deliver something that was as good, if not better than Celeste. And that is part of the reason that this game is canceled, because there's just, the devs are taking that pressure to heart, and that can't be good for not only the game itself and the development of it, but also just like a human being making a game, like going from like just making something for the love of it to making something because fans expect it. Like that's got to be a complete 180. So just keep that in mind the next time, you're thinking about games or being disappointed, or just like, and this isn't a finger to point at anyone necessarily, but just, when you're making a comment and you're thinking like, oh, because the devs are going to hear that. The devs might read that, and it does add a lot of pressure. So just remember the human and all that is all I have to say. Again, I'm not really pointing fingers. I'm sure my listeners are completely respectful. Again, I haven't really heard from too many of my listeners, but, just remember the human and all of it. And then, of course, I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we wish Maddie Thorson all the best. So next up, the GLAAD Awards nominees are out. And so we talked about GLAAD in episode 15. And we also talked about it, I think, in episode 13. But we talked about the GLAAD report. But GLAAD, as an organization, does awards every year. And their nominees are out for all the categories. But I specifically want to talk about the single video game category, because it's full of amazing queer games. So from the website, it reads, the GLAAD Media Awards recognize and honor media for their fair, accurate, and inclusive representations of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community and the issues that affect their lives, end quote. So the category for outstanding video game nominees are Caravan Sandwich, Dragon Age: The Veilguard, Dread Delusion, Dustborn, Fear the Spotlight, Life is Strange: Double Exposure, Minds Beneath Us, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, Sorry We're Closed, Until Then. So that's a really, really cool list of games. Some of them we've talked about on the show. I actually specifically talked about Fear the Spotlight when it was announced, and I had no idea that it was queer themed, to be honest. So even though it's been on my wish list, and I've just been I'm kind of biding my time. I think I might pick it up around next Halloween, just because it's a good horror game to play around then. But actually knowing that it's queer, I might jump in a little sooner, if I'm being honest, because it's like a PS1 styled like survival horror game where like you're just trying to avoid a spotlight, like literally a spotlight in this room. But I didn't realize it had like a queer storyline. I thought it was just kind of like a terrifying little PS1 throwback, which it also is that, but I didn't realize there was a second layer to it. I shouldn't have underestimated them, but obviously queer representation in gaming like has a long way to go. But this is a great list of popular and notable games, all from the same year, that actually contain amazing queer representation. And I really do want to take a moment to just like acknowledge that there even is a long list of games like this that includes AAA games on it. So the next step is obviously to hopefully see more queer representation in the AAA space, because I think this basically covers all the AAA games that came out last year. Dragon Age, The Veilguard, Life is Strange, and Paper Mario. Those are the big ones. The rest are on the indie side. So I would love to see more games in the AAA space. Not necessarily on this list, because I do like seeing a lot of indie games on this list. I think they can go toe-to-toe with the Paper Marios and the Life is Stranges and the Dragon Ages, but I would like to see the potential for more AAA games to be on this list. And of course, more indie games too, but indie games are already they're definitely the standouts when it comes to not AAA, when it comes to video game queer representation. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, but I also wanted to say that this is likely the last Nintendo game that's going to be on a list like this for a long time. It's rare enough as it is that we see something from Nintendo at all that has queer representation, especially trans representation. I don't know if I can think of any example from a Nintendo game that actually has gay characters, just traditional gay or lesbian or even bisexual. So the fact that there's trans representation in a Nintendo game at all is pretty wild to me. And the fact that, like, again, it's like, obviously it's a remake of a game, so it's not an original new game, but the fact that they actually remastered it or remade it, depending on how you look at it, and that they kept this character intact, this character Vivian, who's a trans femme character, intact in the game. So unless Nintendo in the next couple of years has some, I don't know, some out of left field narrative game with queer characters in the next couple of years, like, I don't think we're going to see much. Maybe if we're lucky, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door sold well enough that they make a sequel in that vein and maybe Vivian comes back or they have another queer character. But, like, I really don't see, Nintendo games in general don't really have a lot of romantic representation and themes anyway. Like, the closest I can think of is, like, maybe, like, in most Nintendo games anyway. I haven't finished Another Code Recollection, so there might be some romantic stuff in there, but for the most part, Nintendo games are very light on story. So, like, Mario Odyssey, for example, has a little bit of story with Bowser trying to marry Peach, and there's, like, a little bit at the end. Spoiler alert, skip ahead like 30 seconds, but Mario and Bowser both try to propose to Peach at the end, and she kind of says, like, no, I don't need no man, which is, like, good for her, honestly. But I'm kind of, again, rambling here because I have no one to stop me, no one to jump in with their thoughts as well. But anyway, the last thing I'm going to say about this is that the 36th annual GLAAD Media Awards will take place in Los Angeles on March 27th. I don't think it's going to be televised or streamed or anything like that. But on this podcast, I will cover the winners from this category, or the winner from this category. So I don't know who I would even give it to be honest. These all are great games. I think the one I would, as sad as it makes me feel to turn down some good trans representation in a game, I thought Life is Strange Double Exposure was probably the weakest video game on the list. But honestly, if this list is about a good game with good queer representation, it does have a really good queer representation. Life is Strange. It runs a lot of the gamut. I won't say it runs the whole gamut. There's obviously a lot of representation that's not in there. But yeah, this is still, like, I mean, honestly, I don't know who I would vote for. I haven't even played all these games. I think I would want to play all these games first before really voting, but I can't vote anyway. So I'm going to move on to the next headline. Actually, we're going to do a series of headlines now. I'm going to go through these super quick because they're very short. I don't really have too much to say about them, but Sword of the Necromancer Resurrection, which is the 3D remake of Sword of the Necromancer that we discussed actually in episode 14, has officially released and is now available on PC, Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series S and X. Sword of the Necromancer Resurrection is an action RPG about a woman trying to resurrect her dead girlfriend. So I haven't played it yet, but I did see a couple of major review sites note that the story is good and the gameplay leaves something to be desired, but the Steam reviews are actually pretty positive, so grain of salt on both those cases. The game is on sale for the launch window. At the time of recording anyway, I think it's still on sale. It might not be when this podcast comes out. It's reasonably priced. There's also a very reasonably priced original game, which is like a top-down Zelda-like kind of roguelite game, just called Sword of the Necromancer, which has been out since 2021, I think. So check either of those out. Really great sapphic representation. Sonic the Hedgehog 4, the movie, not the game, has an official release date, and it's coming out on March 19th, 2027, so mark those calendars and don't plan anything else on that date, because Amy Lynn has demanded that. No, I'm just kidding. Amy Lynn is a very sweet person. She never demands anything. But actually go listen to episode 15 if you're okay with some spoilers from Sonic the Hedgehog 3 movie, because she talks about some queer euphoria on that, especially some trans feminine euphoria she had with the movie based on her experience with the games. It's a really, really great segment. I highly recommend checking it out. Moving on, there is Lost Records Bloom and Rage news. Donut has delayed the release of the second episode, which is called Tape 2, keeping in theme with its 90s setting. So it was originally planned for March 18th. It's now releasing April 15th. Tape 1 is still set for February 18th. Lots of teens in there. We still don't know if the game will have any queer representation, but the developer Don't Nod, as I mentioned before, is famously behind other queer stories like Life is Strange and Tell Me Why. Those are both amazing games, by the way, Life is Strange and Tell Me Why. You should really just actually stop listening to this podcast right now and go play them because it's so good. Seriously, pause the podcast, go play them, come back and listen to the rest. They're so good. All right, I assume you paused and you came back and you played the game, so I'm really glad. My final quick headline. Xbox held their usual January Developer Direct this week, where they not only showcase new games and trailers, but they heavily feature the developers behind all the games in the Direct. There was no confirmed queer representation in the Direct, but one of the games in particular featured a black woman as the main protagonist, which is sadly more rare these days than it should be. That game is called South of Midnight. It's due out April 8th. You should go check out the trailer because it looks amazing, honestly. It's highly stylized, looks super cool, the setting is amazing. Other games shown off include Doom the Dark Ages, which is coming May 15th, Claire Obscure Expedition 33, which is coming April 24th, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, which they shadow dropped and can be played right now, and Ninja Gaiden 4, which is coming this fall. That's it for the quick headlines. I have some more mildly disappointing headlines coming up. I apologize in advance, but I think they're quite relevant to this podcast. So a bunch of websites are citing a report from some random dude that I've never heard of, and they're taking it seriously. So apparently, and I'm not trying to undermine who this guy, I just don't know who this person is. And in the haste to get this podcast out, I didn't do a ton of research, but apparently there is hope that GTA 6 will, quote, cost $100, unquote, and that it will save the industry. So I'm going to quote Video Games Chronicle because they summed it up better than I could reword it, if I'm being honest. So they say, quote, according to the report, there is hope within the video game industry that publisher Take-Two will use the unprecedented excitement around GTA 6 in order to bump up the default price of the game to $100. Again, that's US dollars. Quote, it's believed that if Take-Two took this step with GTA 6, a game that will sell incredibly well regardless of the price, that others could follow suit and potentially aid in recovering spiraling development costs. GTA publisher Take-Two was one of the first to raise the price of games from $60 to $70 in 2020, using the transition to the next generation of consoles as an excuse. While it is likely that GTA 6 will be released with a $100 version as part of a lineup of various special editions, as is usual, I'm adding that little bit as is usual in myself, but quote, it's currently expected that the standard game case will be $70. So, end quote. I have some thoughts. On one hand, and bear with me here, because this is kind of like a nuanced point, and I'm not sure which side I really agree with, in my own opinion, but this is bad for the consumer. Games costing $100 could mean they cost more in all regions, obviously. So £100, €100, 145 Canadian, which is where I am, I'm in Canada, and 160 Australian dollars, just to name a few Western regions. On the other hand, despite being obviously thinly veiled corporate greed, if this does help offset development costs and potentially leads to saving more jobs and creating more jobs and less layoffs, better settings and timelines for developers, I could be potentially convinced that this would be a good thing. That said, I really do have my doubts that this isn't some gateway drug to make us pay more without actually fixing any of the real problems in the video games industry. So, I've said this before in this podcast, but grain of salt, both on this report, based on based on also my opinion too. But if you're listening to this podcast, please leave a comment on your listening platform or on any one of the social media pages at True Avatars, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially if you disagree with either of my opinions or even both. So, also, sorry, my voice is getting a little croaky. Usually I don't talk for this long. I have a guest here, but I have one more article here for you. And this again comes from Video Games Chronicle. Dragon Age the Veilguard has underperformed, which probably isn't surprising to a lot of people, but quote, EA said on Wednesday that Dragon Age the Veilguard, released in October, engaged around 1.5 million players during the 3 months that ended December 31st, 2024, which it said was nearly half of its expectations. End quote. So a queer game not selling well is not a good thing. I think we can all agree on that. And this stat includes more than just people who bought it, but also people who play it through their EA Play subscription, which for anyone who doesn't know, EA Play is like their version of Game Pass. So it's like a subscription service. I've seen a lot of sentiment that the game didn't do well because of its queer inclusion. I assume this is just like a small group of hateful trolls, but a lot of people are also disappointed that the game was too different from the previous games, which turned away fans who played those original games. The original Dragon Age games are full of queer representation, so I kind of doubt that the representation is what hurt the game's success, given that the other games were really successful. But I do hope that EA and other publishers don't learn the wrong lesson and assume it was the queer representation. In episode 16, I spoke with Frank Hopewell-Smith, and we did discuss the impact of queer representation on sales and player feedback. And in that podcast, Frank did clarify that it doesn't seem to be queer representation that hurts games, that this broad representation of stories does actually bring players in, or at least it doesn't hurt a game's sales. So I do hope, there is a very big part of me that hopes that it was just the fact that the game was very different from its predecessors, or maybe it wasn't a strong enough story, or maybe not a strong enough game in and of itself. So I hope that Mass Effect 5, for example, which I know the Mass Effect series is also very queer, I hope that Mass Effect 5, they don't pull back on the queer representation in that game if they have any plan, and I assume they do. Because again, BioWare does kind of pride itself on its queer representation in all of its games. So again, Mass Effect 5, I think it's Mass Effect 5 that's in development right now, but the next Mass Effect game is in development, and it would be just really disappointing if it had minimal representation or no queer characters at all. So anyway, that's it for the news. Thank you for sticking around so far to hear all that. At least me just being here doing it keeps it kind of short, even though I do like to hear from my guests and what they think of the news. But at least it's been a busy week of news. I didn't expect January to be so busy, if I'm being honest. Usually it's pretty quiet, but it might just be that there's a lot of news coming out before the storm of Nintendo Switch 2, the storm of just all the games for the year. I know February and March in particular are going to have a lot of games released. And also GTA 6 is supposed to come out this year. So maybe everyone's just trying to get out ahead of it, because those are going to take up a lot of space in players' brains. For me, especially the Nintendo Switch 2, I'm very excited for. And I'm looking forward to that April 2nd Direct, which we're going to cover extensively on this show. Don't worry. I don't know if it'll be a bonus podcast or just part of that week's regular podcast, but don't worry. There'll be a nice meaty episode on that. But anyway, after a short musical interlude, I hope you'll stay with me because I will be back with my guest for this week, as I mentioned before, Lloyd Lloydster, and he will discuss his experience as a trans-masculine Twitch streamer. Hi True Avatars, we are back from the break, and with me is Lloyd Lloydster. Lloyd is a trans man who streams a wide variety of games on Twitch. Lloyd's pronouns are he, him. Hi Lloyd, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. I'm happy to be here. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm really excited to finally have a trans man on the show. I know that seems like weird and like, kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
it might not be what you mean, but I'm fetishizing is coming to mind.
I mean, I guess, yeah, to some extent, it means like, you're like our staple, like our one, yes. Oh, well, we're checking a box by having a trans man on the show. But I've said before that it's been of a clam bake on the podcast. And while I'm like very, very proud of a show, any podcast or any media that's like women run and women focused, like this is still a queer podcast. And I haven't had a lot of men on the show, cis or trans. So I'm happy and honored that you're our first trans man on the show. And well, basically, yeah, I want to pick your brain and diversify our podcast, as weird as that sounds to say. So
thank you so much for having me. And it's funny that you say that. I think like the coming from most other demographics, I might feel a way, but I'm just super excited to be here. Visibility is a wonderful thing. Creating community is a wonderful thing. So thank you.
Yeah, we're so happy, or I'm so happy that you're here. So I thought we'd jump right into things, and it's more of an interview format today. And I'd like to start with like an easy question to break the ice. And help listeners get to know you better too. So, what's your favorite video game?
I'm someone who like takes these kinds of questions very literally. So I'm like already prepping myself. Like you don't have to there's no wrong answer here. What do you enjoy now? So no one's gonna be like, oh, what? That can't be your favorite game. But anyways. At the moment, I'm absolutely obsessed with Octopath Traveler. And I'm a bit like behind. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when it came out, but it showed up on Game Pass for me, and I was like, "Ooh, that's been like on the back of my brain for a while." And so I'm streaming it on Twitch now, and it's captivated me in a way that a game hasn't in a while. And some of the things that I love the most about it is the ambiance it creates just brings me back to like early 2000s high fantasy RPG vibes. The music, the graphics, the pixel art, the familiar yet like dastardly adventurous plot. And on top of it all, it has this beautiful like 3D element to it that kind of reminds me a bit of like how you know how like Paper Mario, if you're familiar with that game, how
Yeah,
it's
no, I'm playing
got
Thousand Year Door right now, actually.
oh, okay, great. So it's got that similar 2D element where the characters and like certain assets are very flat, but it's got like this wonderful rendering to it where there's dramatic shadows, there's light rays, there's particle effects, and I'm obsessed.
I love the HD. So the style you're talking about, I know Paper Mario isn't, they don't call it HD 2D, but I
Okay.
do really love like what you're talking about, like this 2D merging with 3D and meeting in the middle, kind of. I played Live Alive and I didn't finish it because I got so busy with other games and just life. But Live Alive was inspired, like the original game was just a regular 2D top-down RPG, but when they remade it, they made it look like Octopath Traveler, and I'm like in love with that art
Oh,
style. Um,
okay.
I don't tell a lot of people this, but like I hoard video games sometimes, especially physical games that I think are like going to be expensive later, like JRPGs that go on limited print runs. So like I've kind of have a
Ooh.
few of these HD 2D games tucked away for like a rainy day when I have time to play them. Because as you know, JRPGs are like a huge time suck, right? Even though it's an
Mm.
enjoyable time suck, like it's so many hours into it. So Octopath 2, Live Alive, and the new they recently remade Dragon Quest 3 in HD 2D, and I've been
Oh,
like
did
kind
they?
of chomping at the bit to play that too. So I love that art style. I'm so glad you mentioned it actually, because we haven't really had a chance to talk about it at length on the show too much. Um, but yeah, I just anyway. So
Ooh.
have you finished Octopath 1 yet? And if so, are you planning to jump into Octopath 2 after?
Oh my goodness, it's embarrassing. I every time I boot it up, it tells you in bold letters, bold numbers, your time commitment, your and I think I'm in the 20 hours now, and oh gosh, for anyone who doesn't know, how it's set up is there are 8 main characters. At any given time, one of these characters could be your main character, and the plot is quite cyclical how it works. You go through all of chapter one for all of the characters. Then, as you finish chapter ones, the chapter twos populate on the map and so on and so forth. And so I'm about 20 ish, 20 plus hours and change into the game, and I just finished everyone's chapter one. Uh, there are, I think, 4 for every, like, total for everybody. So I'm just, whenever I see it, I'm like, oh, we have a mountain range to climb. We've gotten to a nice little viewpoint, but oh boy.
That's kind of encouraging. I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it. If like some people want shorter games, some people want to get the most bang for their buck when they play. But I think 20 hours for chapter one is like that's incredible value, and like that's a good like I don't
That's
know
true.
if I had time to sink into an JRPG, that would be the one to do it, right? Like 20 hours for chapter one. How many
Oh my
games can you
gosh.
really name that have a chapter one like that?
That's a really good point. And I'm also going to give like a little caveat. My community is probably cackling at me because I'm known for taking a hot minute. I get distracted, I'm talking to chat, like things happen. So I'm saying 20 hours, and there's probably folks out there who are like, come on, buddy. Like, I could have done it in 6. But no, like, while me enjoying it and the way I enjoy it, yeah, you're completely right. Like, some games recently, you like as you can see like if you get the game on Steam and you go down to the reviews and you see like the average hourage of the people like how much they've played before they leave the reviews and you're like 4 5 6 hours maybe for some of these games. uh but no, Octopath is it's gonna be a minute, and that's I like your spin on it. I like your spin. It's a positive thing. I think I get a little worried that my brain's gonna rotate the hyperfocus before I get done with it, but I'm very cozy right now.
Well, the nice thing about JRPGs is when you leave them and you come back to them, like the battle systems are like no matter how complicated they might be, like you can just go find a wild enemy, like in Pokemon when you go find like a wild, you can go relearn it's like riding a bike. You can just go relearn the battle system quickly, and then before you know it, you remember where you left off, and then you're right back into another, you know, five. I had one guest on the show when he was talking about it. Um, I think he talked about it on the show, but he talks to me in person about it a lot. Is that he likes to it's like his comfort game. Like he will just use the grinding element of it to like just kind of like decompress after a long day.
Oh,
So
I love that. I
um
love that. Yeah.
yeah. Um So games like Octopath Traveler, are these like the same kind of games you like to play on stream? Like what other types of games do you like to play when you're streaming?
So let's see. Octopath is a pretty good one. What I usually do is I kind of don't play a similar title twice. Like if one catches my fancy, awesome, wonderful. But sometimes what I rotate into is if I finish a long title, which is like a story-driven game, RPG like this one, I might do like a quick indie game or like a quick smaller game. Ones that we've done, Donut County. Donut County was
Mhm.
an adorable surprise, and that was like a couple hours, and it was done, and it was so good. Um, Indie games for sure. Story-driven games, and then some MMO stuff on my stream. Definitely, I know. Like, if you're familiar with Twitch, some folks might be really familiar with everyone calling themselves a variety streamer, and and myself, I really like a little bit of everything. So 2 days a week I stream solo games, and then Sunday mornings you might catch me playing MMOs or other online games with my family. So very different vibes from me being a chaotic little trying my best guy on my solo stream days to no one in my family being able to complete a thought, and we all are trying so hard. It's like herding kittens to like finish tasks. It's wonderful, but it's a whole rainbow.
I love that you call yourself a variety streamer. And I just, not so much the terminology of it, but just that's kind of your goal. That's like your, like, quote unquote specialty, I guess, because like when your viewers, I assume you have regulars come to watch you, like they're getting a good smattering of like different stuff, especially if like when I go watch streams and when I go watch let's plays, it's usually something I was maybe thinking about playing, or something that I didn't want to play necessarily, but I wanted to watch someone else play. And then before you know
Mm.
it, like you've experienced a whole new genre you didn't think you were going to enjoy, and then suddenly in my case I find myself like making a list of all the games from that genre that I'm going to enjoy and like putting them on my wish list. So
Yeah, that may and I do it for myself and for the community too, right? Because like you said, there's some folks who, I love them. They're like some of my ride or dies, and I'm so thankful for them. And then some folks hop in because of the, like you just said, like of the game. They're like, oh, I was kind of curious about this game. I wanted to see. And it's really neat. Some games that have cult followings, uh, I'll meet people who it's like I've seen, I've been watching speed runs of this game, hours and hours I've watched of this game, and I wanted to see someone play it for the first time. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. That is so
that is
cool. Like
so cool,
something you
yeah.
love to share that like first time energy with someone. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. I'm happy to be that for you.
Yeah, video games are, for me, I do that with movies. I'm always like, when I watch someone else watch a movie I love for the first time, it's like you get to, it's almost like experiencing it for the first time again, but you can't ever get that. So you have to watch someone else. So I do want to jump around a tiny bit, because we're talking about like some of the very big positives of streaming and just like general things before we jump into like some of the more gender specific questions. I wanted to ask
Mm.
what you love most about streaming.
Oh, so what I love most about streaming is it's quite funny. Some people might feel very different than I do, but I tried pre-recorded videos and I tried pre-recorded content creation. And there's something about nothing, talking to nothing, like getting no live interaction with humans. That was very othering to me. It was very like, very difficult for me to, playing games by myself and like trying to pre-record and edit stuff. Editing just wasn't a thing for me. It's just not in my blood, and I'm okay with that. I tried for a really long time. Maybe, but maybe in the future I'll have some luck. But the thing that I love the most about streaming is, someone from like Romania could jump into chat. And based on the time zone, they could be on their lunch break or something. And, I could ask them how their day's going, ask them what games they're up to. And it's just like that, like, it's such like a neat way to meet other people. And the world just becomes so much like closer when I'm streaming, and I get to meet new people and meeting similar people or different people, just people I click with. I've made like a small like extended family in Scotland, for instance, and I met all of them through my adventures in Twitch. So that's what I like about streaming, is that live element where, you know, I set a schedule. Not everyone does, but I set a schedule so folks can always know when to check in and find me. And it's almost like you're like sitting down and having dinner with your internet family.
Aw, that's so sweet. Yeah, it really helps to like, you've gotten like, it's like an icebreaker. Like you already know you have one thing in common with the people in your audience. They've either played the game or they're interested in the game that you're streaming. So you've got that like that center point that kind of like gets you through the door. But I really love that. I like that, having dinner with your streaming audience. That's adorable, actually. I love that. So how have you explored your gender and your sexuality through the games you've played?
Yeah. For me, I didn't know, you know, these other parts of me, for sure, for certain. But until I was an adult, I didn't really have the language for these different things about me. But just like I've been gaming since I was probably 6 or 7. I remember not learning how to read, but my younger brother didn't really know how to read, so I would read out loud the dialogue prompts in video games. And one of the first games that like we played together was Legend of Dragoon, and I'm like sitting there reading the dialogue options out loud, and it was super funny. My dad happened to be in the room because he was who introduced us, and I doubt he remembers this. Maybe he does. But in high fantasy games, really popular item, the bastard sword. Like it just happens. And I'm reading it, and I think it's the first time I've ever read this word in my young life. And he's like, maybe we don't say that out loud. Maybe. But that game stuck with me forever, and you know, I found myself like gravitating towards the guy characters whenever I had options in games. And for a while I was thinking like, oh, it's maybe just because it was really popular forever for certain classes in video games to be tied behind male versus female. And I was like, okay, I just happen to, you know, gravitate towards those classes, sure. And as, you know, as I affectionately look back at my life and like revisit certain things, I like realize that like certain characters I played, it wasn't all a coincidence, right? Everything was part of me, and it's actually funny. So there's Soul Calibur. Is it a franchise that you might be a little familiar with?
The one thing I know about Soul Calibur is that it had a Legend of Zelda crossover maybe 20 years ago. And that's insofar as my knowledge extends to that series. But I do know what you're talking about, yes.
That's perfectly fine. I couldn't tell you a lick of lore from it. But there is one like infamous character you can play. I think his name is Valdo. And he is this like... all of the characters, they have like a little like... line where it says what kind of combat style they have, you know, martial arts or this or that, and Valdo, it just says self-taught, and which I think is hilarious because there's no like great way to fully explain what Valdo is. Valdo is this like very acrobatic character. He's in like leather spikes. It's just, and he's like flipping around and doing these things with knives. And I remember the first time I saw him, I was like, that's a guy. And I was like, I thought he was the coolest thing. And like, I think that was one of my earliest, hey, gender's a word. It's not a thing. It doesn't mean anything other than what it means to the person. And I just thought Valdo was the coolest thing ever. If you ever get the chance, feel free to look up a photo of him. But He's like, a lot of folks find him very freaky, very like, he's not like a great person, but just the concept of him, I remember rocking my world like as I was coming up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just quickly googling him now, and he's wow, yeah, he's a gender, like he's his own he's his own thing there.
He's his own thing.
And I'm just going off the Google images here. Any listeners, please feel free to Google Voldo. You said it's pronounced Valdo, I think. Voldo is the way to spell Valdo. And the Google images that come up here, like his static render in his pose is just like, come at me, bro. He's got the knives. I think if he could, he'd be, if it was like, it wouldn't botch the rating, he'd be flipping the bird to the viewer if he could with his knives. So when we first spoke, you mentioned that you've been streaming for a total of 5 years, but only as Lloyd for the last 2 years or so. So I'm curious, how has your transition affected your streams, and how have your viewers reacted to your transition on stream?
Yes. So, my journey with my gender, was I had started streaming. I've been streaming for a couple years, and at the time I had the she, her pronouns, and, you know, some certain things started happening privately and personally where I was exploring bits of myself, and I realized I wanted to test drive. I wanted to test drive this, my personal relationship with gender, and for me, being a very like logic-brained person when approaching life changes or goals and things, I ran into some internalized blockages, and so at first I did she, they, and you know, I mentioned it to stream. I was trying this thing out, updated my social media bios for stream, and everyone was super lovely. Everyone was like, awesome, yeah, we got this, cool. And then X amount of time passed, and I was like, hey, we're doing they, them. And they're like, cool, sick, we're in. And and then we got to a he, they period, and they're like, we got it, boss. And then he, him happened, and that was like the big one. And that's when I knew I'd Goldilocks myself into the right spot. And after, even though I had essentially come out a couple of times, you know, with the shifting pronouns, this one felt like I was bringing someone home to meet my parents, in a way, by being like, hey, community, we've been here before. This one's different. And they were phenomenal. And it's really cool because with streaming, there's something you can set up with chat bots where you can automatically have certain chat messages go off after a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of time paired with how many other people have chatted. Yeah, there's a few, you know, you can program it as a few different ways. And so whenever I did that, you know, I changed my pronouns. I would use that to sort of advocate for myself. But that way, there was like a passive chat reminder about what my pronouns were, and I was able to, you know, you can tag your pronouns too. So there was really there's a lot of tools available to, you know, make your, you know, it helped me advocate for myself and set things up so that I wasn't, it wasn't as emotionally taxing as it could have been. The amount of support I got was phenomenal, and I'm just very thankful that my community and we were setting up an ally space to begin with. Like, I was a super ally before I really understood that I was trans and pansexual, and so by setting up like really strong rules in both my Discord, my community Discord, and in Twitch chat, you know, we had this set up so that the space was for either LGBTQ folks or folks who accepted that and celebrated our existence. And I think that's what really set us all up for success for that transition, actual in every sense of the word.
Right. No, that's awesome. I think it's great that your community was so supportive, because I can I mean, I didn't really have like a following before I transitioned. Like I was very much in my own shell. Like I hadn't created content since I was like a teenager. So I can only imagine too, like my fear would have been that if I had been transitioning kind of in real time in front of an audience, I would be very scared each time I took a step. And like when I transitioned to, like I went straight from the he him to the she her. I didn't run the spectrum. I didn't run the gamut. Like it wasn't like a gradient that I slowly moved through. So we had very different transitions in that sense. And I honestly, I'm kind of like, I think that's really a really cool way to like not only slowly break it to your audience, even if you're only just figuring it out for yourself, but it's also a really good way to like figure it out for figure it out for yourself, you know, to just like slowly you're like, okay, we're going to do she, they now. And then we're just going to change one of the, you know, we're like, just, I think that's really cool. I'm just kind of gushing at this point.
Yeah. And, it's funny you say that, because it's giving me a chance to celebrate that part of me, because normally I have that part, I give that part some apprehension, so I'm like, hey, can we just like know what we want and embrace it? We don't have to we don't have to trick ourselves into thinking it's our idea, like. But
Right.
I love that.
So we talked about this a little bit, but from a perspective of your transition, and not just like where you came from, but where you are now, is how do you keep yourself safe while you're streaming, both like physically and emotionally?
Yeah, you know, going forward, not entirely sure, you know, but up until this point, how I've, you know, set up safety is having a moderation team that I trust, really knowing that there's someone in chat at any time who, if, you know, bad actors show up in chat or something called what's called a hate raid would happen.
Oh my gosh.
That Yeah, those are when bad actors get some folks together, they raid your channel, and they are not great. It can range from them having inappropriate screen names to blasting the chat. But what's really great is I have a community of streamers as well, where we all have kind of like shared certain tools. There's a lot of auto moderation tools that can auto ban certain words, or, you know, you can. I've set up a system where I just press one button, and if it happens, like 5 or 6 things happen. It will set chat to subscribers only mode, or even turn off chat depending on how I want to deal with the situation. Meaning that no one can say anything. They don't have a platform. They don't have a, you know, they're not given any space. I can automatically start playing ads, because if someone wants to send a bunch of people here, great, we're gonna make money off of them. Like, let's let's not give them my reaction. Let's give them ads instead. And it automatically will ban folks who just showed up. A couple of things. But knowing that I've set up, you know, live people watching the chat, and I've got, you know, some tools that the community has shared and kept growing together. That's how I stay safe.
Yeah, no, that's I really like that you have like trusted people who you can rely on to like help filter out the stuff that especially the mod, like the auto tools don't really get, because like it's a good net to cast, but it's not going to catch everything, and people eventually too figure out, if someone's dedicated, they can like, they figure out what got them the first time, and they come back and they try something new, and they keep trying it until they figure out what gets them around the tools, and then that's when you need a human being to kind of step in. So it's really nice that you have a team of people, like a group of people that you rely on for that. That's kind of like, that's amazing, I think. So changing it up a little bit, I'm curious, because I definitely feel this with my content creation. I feel this with like in the way I dress, for example, although I'm not specifically necessarily asking you about that. But do you feel an expectation to present like masculinity on stream, or a pressure to play games that are typically associated with male gamers?
So, my personal journey with dysphoria, for anyone, that might be a new term for me. It could mean different things for other people, but for me, it's any collection of feelings or emotions where I either suddenly feel not connected to my body, I don't feel well. If I see myself, it doesn't look like me, doesn't feel like me. I get like a little bit of not dysregulation. There's a better word for it, but it's the idea of I just kind of like hearing static, but me being connected to my mortal body. So that's and so for me, as I'm exploring myself, exploring, what kind of expression I feel best with, like, like haircuts or clothing and whatever. At the moment, I'm not streaming with my webcam on. I have social media posts with myself. But for me, I'm just not in a webcam like place. And at first, I felt that as like a sort of defeat in a way because, I've done webcams for years, had the webcam on. It's a very easy way to show emotion and gratitude when people like follow or subscribe or whatever. But if I was if I was editing clips after the stream, even if I hid the preview for myself, it would throw me off. It would I wasn't liking any of the clips. And so it was just, I realized I found peace with having webcam off for now. And, that is something that I think one day it would be really cool if I could have the webcam on, but I think for now I'm going to keep up with that. And for about, some pressure to pick like what kind of content to cover, I think that comes in waves. I think that the pressure for that might come in waves. Like if I see like a dating sim or something, and I'm like, oh, that's adorable, and then I like would be like adorable, and then I'm like, well, maybe not, like maybe I'm feeling vulnerable, right? And I'm catching myself like picking more neutral titles to take care of myself that day. But then I realized that most of my viewers at the moment are folks who've been with me, folks who know me, who wouldn't expect anything less than a little bit of goofiness, adorable little feral woodland creature vibes. And there's no hiding that, and I'm okay with that.
So, what are your goals for the future?
Yeah, my goals in like if I could just like have it happen would be to stream full time. I would absolutely be over the moon to be able to just spend like 8 hours a day just, goofing it up, talking to everybody, having a space where I can like work with my community. So content creation full time would be really cool. Big picture items, I've always said, and I will continue to say, I want to be that guy who's a judge on Chopped and he has no business being there. I want to be the personality, like like even if you don't watch video games, you've heard of this person. Like whether they're just invited to events that they have no business being there. I'm completely fine being that's like the dream. That's the dream. Yep.
I mean, that's fair. I think even as a content creator myself, I would love this for this podcast to have a bigger platform. So I totally get the because there are streamers, there are people that have that definitely started out on Twitch. They started out on YouTube who are small beginnings, and now some of them are working in games themselves now, working on actual as narrative leads on games, and some people are just household names, or at least what I like to call internet household names. I don't think my parents would know who Pokimane is, for example, but we know, right? So our generation and the generation below us knows for sure too. Kids who are coming up into the content creation space and watch a lot of Twitch streams. So I love the honesty in that, because I think everyone dreams for not to put a negative spin on it, because sometimes I associate this the connotation of this word celebrity with a negative connotation, but I think everyone to to some degree would love a celebrity status of some sort. But I think too for trans and queer content creators, especially, like I think there should be more of us who are at celebrity status, especially
Yes.
ones who like kind of inject positivity into the space, because a lot of us, when we get up there, it becomes kind of like a negative grift. Like when I think about like the Keffels of the world, for example, and I hate that I know that name, but like there are a lot of like there are a lot of streamers who get there and then they kind of like throw away the trans element, or they throw away the queer element and start taking advantage of people. So I'm very much cheering for you, because I think we need a lot more positive people in the space, for sure.
Thank you. And like before I like lose my when you were just saying that, it reminded me the big like the perfect like that everyone where you want to go for like representation for a community is, I want there to be so many of us that we all don't have to be perfect, right? I want us to misbehave. I want us to not each one of us to have to be a model citizen. You know, I want us to be able to make mistakes without it being like a reflection on everyone. So like I want that. I want that for us.
I want that for us too. No, that is such a good point, and I think we can get there. I am of the firm belief that we can get there in our lifetimes, at the very least. So like maybe the generation below us or the generation after that doesn't even have to like even ever consider like I need to be a model citizen, because they can just be who they are. Because especially transitioning to like, they call it transitioning because you're really, a lot of us are moving from A to B, and then when we get to B, for example, we want to kind of forget that we ever were at A. So having to kind of put that all aside and just be who we are, forget the transness or not, but just being ourselves would be so cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like another goal I was thinking of that my brain had put it in a spot because it's not very accessible to me at the moment, but one of my goals is also to do voice acting. Like perfect world would be to be able to, you know, voice act in either video games or projects or what have you. And I know voice and an individual's relationship with their voice is sometimes a very like treacherous sort of ground for some folks who are transitioning. And for me, I have this relationship that I want to have go in a healthier direction between myself and my voice. And like if I look at it objectively right now, I have a ridiculous amount of range. As a voice actor, I could do very feminine and very masculine stuff if I take the time to do what I've been taught and do all the different little things. But yeah, just kind of manifesting that.
No, that's awesome. I think, like I said, trans representation in content creation, but also trans representation like in any space, especially voice acting, where like you said, it's such it can be a very dysphoria-inducing experience for ourselves. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, but like I'm personally not all about my voice passing. My experience is that like I tried voice training and not only was it stressful, but also every avenue I went down, it didn't sound like me. It never felt like me. So I'm not always like, I have a presenter voice that is like, I speak more from the front of my mouth, but then sometimes when I like get more relaxed, I speak more from the back of my throat, like I'm speaking now. But I think like from a perspective of like voice acting and like being visible, especially as visible as voice actors can be, is like, I think it would be really cool to like hear more trans voices in media, and normalizing like what trans voices sound like, because like some of us sound completely cis, some of us sound very obviously to quote unquote, you know, Twitter terminology, but like clockiness, right? But then there's also like just like a wide range of like androgyny to like very specifically gendered stuff. So like I love that, and where especially wherever you take your voice and wherever you take your range too. So I'm cheering for you. Like I'm like I'm like I'm gonna be looking for your name in the credits someday.
Thank you. Yeah, and you just touched on something else that I catch myself doing. If all of like some of my favorite voices are unique, right? And they're like unique either in respect to gender or just an expression, and they're unique, and I love them, and I celebrate it for other people. And so I just need to direct that kindness to myself more often. And it's not, I accept it's not going to be accessible every day, but, just kind of making that space that I give to everyone else. And without even, like, going out of my way to give, just need to turn that around a bit.
Just remember that most people either, at least when I go out in public, most people either can't tell or they don't care, and I get gendered correctly like 99% of the time. And I do notice sometimes, like, I get misgendered occasionally, and like maybe one time out of like every 1,000 interactions it's like malicious. But like I think most people are in our corner, and that's the kind of, like, I think just the visibility of it and just going out there and being you is like the best thing we can possibly do.
Yes,
with our voices.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I want to know, how did you choose your name?
So, there's two little stories to that. Actually, we touched on the first half of it. In Legend of Dragoon, there's, I've actually never finished the game because we had, I don't know if you remember, for PlayStation 1s, they would, for the longer games, would sometimes have 4, 5, 6 discs. Well, Legend of Dragoon, the 4th disc, had this horrible scratch in it. We did all of the things, but we could just never finish the game. So I say that because I actually don't know how the game necessarily ends, but this character, he's set up as being the antagonist for most of it. And his name is Lloyd, and I was obsessed with him as a child. And just kind of, I guess, just existed in the background of my mind forever. And then, fast forward to late pandemic, whenever, past me was like, hey, community, we're doing this he-him thing, I'm a man, thank you for being here for this journey. The very next game I played was Arcade Spirits.
Yes, this has come up on our show before. It's a popular one.
They're doing the work. They're doing the work for the queer community, I'll tell you. And the most wonderful things about it is just at the beginning, just simply the act of asking, what are your pronouns? And I think it has some gender neutral options. I think it might have a neo pronoun or two. It's been a minute since I've looked at the options, so I might be lying to you. But, so at the very beginning, you're set up. You know a little bit about what the story's gonna be. You are someone who's trying to be a pro, like in the pro circuit for arcade games, because in this alternative universe, arcade games never died. So what's your name? And so it's like suggested it's gonna be a bit of a screen name situation. And I knew Lloyd was something that I was feeling out, test driving in my own life. And I was like, let's not overthink this. Let's just be goofy as heck. So we did Lloyd_Lloydster, and we all laughed about it. Chat was like, this is ridiculous, this is goofy. But fast forward 20, 30, however many minutes later, after all of these characters have been calling me Lloydster, and, we're having these wonderful story beats and like just feeling it out. And someone in chat was just like, honestly, I love this. This is great. And I was like, me too. This is permanent. This is forever.
I love hearing stories about how people choose their name, because I did the trans thing where I just gender bent a dead name.
I love that.
I just thought that's what trans people did, so that's what I'm gonna do as well. So I love that everyone has like a cool story about where they like what inspired them, and like I know I don't hate my name. Like I love Zoey. I wouldn't change it. Because like also the letter Z is so like I feel like is also underrepresented, so it almost feels like the queerness of the alphabet in a way. But no, that's so cool. And I like that, like, again, like you had that affirming experience. Like there's nothing like a video game that's giving you that feedback loop of gender euphoria as it like uses your name and pronouns over and over again. For me, that game is Pokemon. When I play Pokemon, especially Legends Arceus, the entire first hour of that game is the professor being like, Zoey, my girl, how are you? This is Zoey, my girl, like constantly. And I'm just like, when I played that game, I was also early in my transition and I was just like, just inject it straight into me. Just like keep going. If Professor Laventon was a real person, I would be obsessed with him. So,
I love that though. That is so good because it's like, yes, what is your name and who are you? This is who I am, and then it tells you, it repeats it back to you. And you're like, yes, that's me.
Yeah, and for you, you also had your stream. You were doing it on stream, so like you had your like audience to back you up and like also experience that euphoria with you. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. No, it's such a good point. And another really cool thing that Arcade Spirits does is like between every chapter, I don't know if chapter is the right word, but there's certain sections where it asks, hey, do you want to revisit your pronouns and your physical appearance? And that, like, it seems so simple, but that was wild. It was great because there were certain times where we had like more androgynous hairstyles, more wild hairstyles, where we got like super fashionable and then we got super not, and it felt so normal and organic in real life. Because like clearly my journey with gender was very, it had some flow to it. And so to be able to mimic that in the game, where if we felt a certain way, we could, it change how we chose our expression. Like we weren't married to it for the whole time, which is like life. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think Arcade Spirits must be one of the only games out there that does something like that, where they keep revisiting like, hey, are you still happy with your name and pronouns? Do you want to change? Like, do you want to change them up? Like that malleability. Like, I feel like it doesn't exist a lot because like we've talked about this on the show in previous episodes, but a lot of games can't offer it because the like programming behind it is so complicated. And that like, even going back, the theory is that like Stardew Valley can't even add they, them pronouns as an option to the game because it's like the game is so hard coded in the way it's already implemented he, him, and she, her. So like whether they added it later in development or they like started out with their plan, like I think Arcade Spirits has got to be one of the only games that offers that option just because of like how complicated it must be to program. So like not only are they like very forward thinking with the audience, but they're also very forward thinking with their programming.
That's really cool. I didn't know that about Stardew Valley, but that makes sense.
To be fair, it's just a theory, like it's never been confirmed, and Concerned Ape, who's the sole developer on the game, or at least was for a time, hasn't really commented too much on it. So we're actually waiting to see. I'm waiting to see if Haunted Chocolatier, the next game from Concerned Ape, has more pronoun options, because then that'll tell us like, oh, is it something he just doesn't want to do, or is it something that he can't do? Like there might be just more of a way of about how he really feels about, because Stardew Valley's got a huge LGBTQ following.
Yes.
So it's, I'm just curious, like how obviously Concerned Ape enjoys the money aspect of that, right? all the financial support from the queer community. But I'm wondering, like, is he ignoring us because he doesn't want to support us too much? Or is he ignoring us because he doesn't have a good answer? Or, maybe Haunted Chocolatier will right all those wrongs, and then we'll just know that, like, okay, obviously it was impossible to go back and add those options.
Haunted Chocolatier, if you're listening, this is your chance. Like, take care of us. Do right by us.
Yeah.
You can do this. I believe in you. And
add neo-pronoun options too. Just let us have any pronouns we want. That'd be great.
Love it. Signed, sealed, sent.
Perfect. So I think that's a good point to stop on. Those are all the questions I had for you. I do have one more though. I'm curious where people can find you.
You can find me Lloyd_Lloydster on Twitch and YouTube and on Blue Sky, but that's one word, Lloyd Lloydster. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, but those are my main platforms.
Awesome. Yeah, especially Blue Sky has that weird, like, it's not just at your name, it's also like .bsky.social or something like that. I always spell it wrong when I'm like looking for people and then no one comes up. I'm like, oh, I didn't enter the handle correctly. They could just remove the .bsky.social and I think it would be much more, anyway, audience friendly. I'm getting in the weeds on that though, but Yeah, so it's been kind of amazing having you on. I wondered if you just had any final thoughts or anything for our listeners before we head out.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much for existing. Whoever you are, whatever you do, whoever you be, thank you for being. I just want to have some space for that.
That's really sweet. So anyway, yeah, thank you for joining me this week on True Avatars, a queer video game podcast. It's been really nice having you on and getting to pick your brain about what it's like being a transmasc streamer. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
And that just about wraps up this week's show. Thanks, True Avatars, for joining me for another episode of your queer video game podcast. If you've made it this far into the episode, I really appreciate you taking the time to support queer-made content, which is a big deal. If you want to support the show, it would be really great if you could leave a rating, review, or comment on your preferred podcast platform. I welcome you to check out the website trueavatarspodcast.com, all one word. That's trueavatarspodcast.com. You can also find the show on Facebook and Instagram under True Avatars, on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube under the handle @TrueAvatars, all one word. Importantly, if you or anyone you know is queer and involved with video games in some way, please don't be shy. I would love to hear from more queer voices in video games. Your voice is unique and valid and worth sharing with the world. And if you don't want to be on the show or know anyone who's interested, but you know about a cool queer video game or a games industry story that's queer related, please let me know. The show's official email is trueavatars.podcast@gmail.com. That's trueavatars.podcast@gmail.com. You can also feel free to reach out via the website or the aforementioned social media pages. Things are tough out there, and queer people need to stick together when we can. Bye, True Avatars. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Take care and stay safe.